Get to those in a minute, a few minutes. So Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a beautiful book, talks about how when she was a kid, she and her family used to spend summers canoe camping in the Adirondacks. Every morning, her father would brew a fresh pot of coffee in one of those old tin can things that you put over the fire, right? And when he had a freshly brewed pot of water, he would stand up dressed in his red checked wool shirt, and he would go and he would stand by the edge of the water that they had been canoeing. And he would lift up that pot of coffee, and as soon as he lifted it, that was the signal for the family to be quiet and to honor this moment. And he would pour out a little bit of that coffee, and he would say, "Here's to the gods of the lake. Here's to the gods of Stony Brook. Here's to the gods of whatever body of water they happened to be floating on in those days." It was important to her as a child that she learned through that little small ceremony every morning that the places they traveled were inspirited, she said. In other words, the Spirit dwelt in them. That they were places that were teeming with life, that there were others who lived there before she got there, and that others would continue to live there after she left. It was a reminder that in Native tradition especially, that as she's praying, that the water and the grass and the trees and the animals, everything is filled with life. Everything is animated. Right? And so this is a reminder of that. She said it taught them as kids to respect the water, to respect the land they were on, and to be grateful for all of it. As a ceremony goes, it was a very basic, simple ceremony that took something ordinary and turned it into something sacred. It connected people to land and to water and to spirit in just something very, very simple. You know, she said that when her grandparents were young, they were in that age, that time in our history when Native peoples were taken, children were taken from their families and put into Catholic schools where, frankly, literally the Indian was beaten out of them, right? They refused to speak their name, their language, wear their clothing, wear their hair that way, do any of their traditions, their rituals. And so much of what was her history was lost to her. So to regain some of that, she started to learn Ojibwe. And as part of learning Ojibwe, one of the words that she learned was Wikwigama. And Wikwigama, as she's reading in her dictionary or whatever, meant to be a bay. And she's like, to be a bay? That's like a verb. That's not a noun. It should just be, Wikwigama is a bay. It doesn't make sense that it's, in our way of English thinking, it's a noun. It's a person, place, or thing. It's not animated. It's not a being. And then suddenly she kind of had this epiphany, and she thought, oh boy, if a bay is a noun, then it's just kind of dead. It's trapped within the confines of human language. But if it's a verb, if it's allowed to be a being, then suddenly we can see it as something that's alive, that's choosing at some point to live and to dwell within, certain shores. And she said to converse with the roots of cedars and the baby mergansers who are around. She said to understand a bay as a verb brought it animation. It brought it life. And I think that's such an amazing thing that we lose. human beings have this tendency to say that we're beings, we are human beings, and everything else is just a thing. And as a thing, we can do whatever we want to anything else. It's there for our purpose. It's there for our use. It's there for our command. But what if we went back to understanding, like they did in the coffee ritual, the sacredness of the land they walked and canoed on? What if we went back to animating the world around us and understanding all of it as sacred beings instead of something simply to be used? If language became a mirror of animation, a way to see God infused in all things. So we're going to try it for a minute. Let's see what happens if we think about water as a being, as something that has animation, as a verb, something that's living and moving and growing. What can we attest to it? What does water do? It flows. What else does water do?
Calms.
It calms. Nourishes. What you were going to say, Teresa?
Gives life.
Gives life. Quenches thirst.
Cleans.
Cleans. Soothes. Refreshes. Energizes.
Erodes.
It erodes. It has the power to wear down the rough edges of things.
Puts out fire.
It puts out fire.
It cools and it heats.
It cools and it heats. Needs help to heat. But yes, it can. All of those things are amazing when we think about it. That this one element that we rely so much on does so many of these things. And those attributes, think about how many of those attributes can be considered also attributes of God. The flowing of God, the sustaining of God, the cleansing of the Spirit, the sustaining, the eroding, wearing down our rough edges, the nourishing, the growing, the quenching. All of them can be used as ways to understand God. And so that's why we sometimes use the term, as our songs did this morning. We talked about the river of God. We talk about, in our scripture this morning, living water. So it gets a little confusing because there's this sort of crisscross interplay between the metaphor of God as being water and the actuality of the Spirit infusing the water, being the water, that God is the water of life. And I don't really care where they intermix and where they go, because for me it all works, right? It all leads us to expand our connection to the divine in our daily lives, in the matter that surrounds us. And it gives us more language to speak about the magnitude of God that we too often confine to the word God. Let's give it more names and more being and more breadth and more width and more expansion. So I want to talk about the scripture for a minute and the woman at the well. But before I go there, let me invite you to think about something. When was the last time you were really, really, really thirsty? Does it happen much anymore? Because, we all go around with like our water bottles. We've got these at our sides all the time. You come in the morning, you go get your coffee or your tea or your water or whatever. Used to be a time you came to church, you couldn't have any of those things in the sanctuary. I had to fight that battle at one church. I don't know how often we actually thirst anymore. And so I think about this woman coming to the well. We also don't have to go to the well. Isn't that a beautiful thing?
Oh, yeah.
So this poor woman, carrying a bucket, maybe 2 buckets, because she's got to get water from I don't know how far away to cook and wash and drink. How thirsty is this poor woman at this time of the day? It's already noon. The sun's high. She's hot. Now, Samaria was a little more fertile land than we sometimes think of the area of Israel, but still, I'm thinking these people knew thirst in a way that we don't know thirst today. Because they had to get it from the well. They had to draw it every day. They had to use it sparingly in whatever they were doing. So here she's coming and she's drawing her water, maybe just for herself, maybe for her family. We don't really know. But I wonder, how thirsty is she at this point? How parched is she? How much is she just dying to get home and have a sip of water, for Pete's sake? And here's Jesus. And he doesn't really seem to care how parched her mouth is. He wants to talk about how parched her soul is. He uses words to describe God as living water. Something that he's experienced the divine as. Something that's used, all of those adjectives that we use, that has been an experience for him of God as nourishing and cleansing and freeing and flowing living water for him. He's using this beautiful metaphor and these beautiful words, and it's totally lost on her. Now maybe she doesn't do metaphor, maybe she's only worried about getting home and doing what she's got to do. But in her head, she's like, something I don't have to go to the well for, right? Is it a magic stone? What can I take with me so I don't have to do this every day? But while she doesn't quite get the whole metaphor of living water, you and I do, right? We know that the metaphor is about the living water that quenches the thirst of our souls. What does it feel like when your soul thirsts? When your soul is parched? What does it feel like?
Painful.
I'm sorry?
It can be painful.
It could be painful. Empty. Jerry?
Dehydrated.
Dehydrated, Jerry.
Artists talk about a dry period.
A dry period.
Being lost.
Being lost. And I'm going back to a dry period. So like no creativity.
Right.
No
Nothing's
inspiration.
there. Nothing's there.
Nothing's there. What else? Does it feel like? I'm sorry? Confined or limited when your soul is parched. When your soul is thirsty.
Trapped.
Wanting, yearning for something more.
Trapped.
Trapped.
Lack of purpose.
Lack of purpose, lack of meaning in life. Absolutely. All of these things, when our souls thirst, when we've lost our wonder and our awe, when we've lost joy and hope, where we've lost that sense of greening and growing within us. We've all been there. We've all had those periods of dryness, of parchedness, feeling like, the desert with the tumbleweeds blowing through it. We've felt like hard, dry, cracked ground like we get here in August. And it doesn't feel like anything can fix those big cracks in my garden no matter how much I water it. So we understand what that feels like. And Jesus uses this animated, wonderful metaphor of living water to say that there is something that we can tap into in the depths of our souls that will bring that nourishment, that life-giving presence, that will be a fountain within us. If only we tap into it. And that's why water gets used so often in our religious ceremonies, just in understanding places as being sacred. Think of the number of springs and fountains and waterfalls and places on the ocean or the rivers in the world that are considered sacred because hopefully has the ability to quench our thirst, but quench our soul's thirst in soothing and mystical spiritual ways. So let me read a couple of these drops because I'm curious. Because we all, I think, have experienced water as powerful, as sacred, as moving, as filling. I'm not going to read them all, but I think I will find a way to put these on something for the next couple of weeks. So this one says the lake where our cabin is. Crystal Lake, Illinois, Lake Michigan, Gulf of Mexico. I'm drawn to all bodies of water, but especially the ocean. A lot of Lake Michigan, Lake Mead, the swimming pool, all the good times at the swimming pool, Yosemite waterfall, my Mima and Papa's pond, the Atlantic Ocean, Mother Superior, my pool, Caribbean waters, gotta be Sue's writing. That lawyer's handwriting that I can barely read. The creek through my yard, all of these places where you have felt touched, where you have felt moved, where perhaps you have felt your spirit filled. I'm going to invite the rest of our band folks here to pass out little cups of water because we're going to do a water meditation to close up today. So if you would just take one and hold on to it for a moment.